WWF Warzone was received well by critics and gamers alike back in 1998, but the landscape of wrestling video games was starting to shift. New developers and publishers were entering the wrestling video game market, and some were making headway with new releases, specifically for the World Wrestling Federation's competition, World Championship Wrestling. While Acclaim and the WWF had a relationship dating back to 1989, the fine folks at WWF HQ were also being courted by other developers who wanted to get their hands on the license. Acclaim wasn't the only game in town, and the WWF was starting to listen. So when WWF Attitude, released in 1999 and hit market shelves, both Acclaim and the WWF were looking for a home run experience for gamers. Did they achieve it? Let's explore. Right out of the gate, I'll go ahead and say, WWF Attitude, a direct sequel to Warzone, is very much a carbon copy of its predecessor in terms of the gameplay. If you're looking for a fresh, brand new experience from Warzone, then you're not necessarily going to find it here. However, what you will find is a polished presentation that takes everything that Warzone is and adds a number of layers and improvements that makes the 1999 release of Attitude a much better offering. Attitude came out in the summer of '99 and once again landed on the PlayStation, Nintendo 64, and Nintendo Game Boy Color. It also received a fourth port, finding home on the Sega Dreamcast later in the year. The first thing you notice when you fire up Attitude is the amount of options available to you as a player. There are more gameplay options than ever before, with the usual fare, but also including some new options, such as First Blood and Iron Man matches. One fun element is creating pay-per-view events. You can name the show whatever you want, pick up to 8 matches to have on the card, and then the best part, you can customize the arena to whatever you want using the in-game options. Although somewhat limited, this was a really nice feature for the time, giving you the ability to choose the type of arena, the color of the lights in and around the ring, and even those little details of ring aprons, rope colors, and so on. Again, for the time, this allowed for some really nice customization and creativity. When you're done, you can save it to your memory card and load it up whenever you want to play it. Another thing that really stands out about Attitude is the size of the roster. At the time, it was the biggest roster for a WWF video game, and it certainly boasts a variety of talent from the Attitude era. All the major players are here as well as the supporting cast. There really is a little something for everyone, with around 40 wrestlers able to compete with, including the ability to use 3 women, with Chyna, Sable, and Jacqueline all unlockable characters. Create a Wrestler returns, with more additions and options to experiment with. One expansion is choosing the voice of your wrestler. In Warzone, all created wrestlers had that default voice, but in Attitude, you have a number of voice options to choose from to better match your wrestler's persona.
Timber! Banzai! Vegetables suck!
Create a Wrestler mode was also expanded with original entrance music, as well as superstar nicknames with unique commentary and crowd chants for each name. Speaking of Create a Wrestler, Attitude swaps out the Challenge mode from Warzone and replaces it with a Career mode. I had a ton of fun with this when I was younger. You take your created wrestler and you try and move up through the company. You start by wrestling in house shows, which are basic non-televised events, and move your way up to TV, starting with smaller shows like Sunday Night Heat and Shotgun Saturday Night, before eventually working your way up further to Monday Night Raw. Your climb up the ladder is reflected by your ability to win matches. Want to get on TV? Win those matches on the live event tour. As you move up the rankings, you'll have the ability to win championships and grow your fame. It's a really solid addition. As mentioned earlier, if you're looking for a different style of gameplay from Warzone, you'll be disappointed to learn that the gameplay is pretty much the same. The multi-button and directional inputs to pull off those moves, it still exists. It's a bit of a bummer, but if you're coming from Warzone, you'll at least know how to get around. There are plenty of presentation improvements that you'll notice throughout the game as well. One of the biggest improvements for me was having entrances for wrestlers, which show unique animations and music. Nothing too crazy, but it adds that presentation element that is such a huge part of wrestling, and something that didn't exist in Warzone.
I'm here to prove that eating meat is healthy for you. Just look at me.
Play-by-play gets a small overhaul as well. Gone are Vince McMahon and Jim Ross, replaced by Shane McMahon and Jerry the King Lawler. It's much of the same, but enough to differentiate from Warzone.
Look out there! There's attitude for you, Shane!
And here's another small element. The gameplay camera is now positioned to show the entrance in the background. So during run-ins and Royal Rumble matches, you can actually see the wrestlers running to the ring. And different arenas have different setups, and the wrestlers interact with them properly. It's pretty nice. Now, in no particular order, here are some other small elements that saw improvements in attitude. Match winners showcased on the Titantron. Post-match celebrations. Matches are shorter with damage depleting faster. You can actually choose your opponent. An expanded move set for each wrestler. And post-match statistics, to name a few. Well, that's all fine and good for the PS1, N64, and Dreamcast releases, but what about WWF Attitude on the Game Boy Color? Let me state for the record, this might be my least favorite wrestling game I've ever played. Even janky controls on old computer wrestling games were much better than the experience I endured playing Attitude on the Game Boy Color. We'll start with the positives because there aren't many. First, the color aspect certainly adds some shine to a wrestling game on a Nintendo handheld. That's a good thing. Another positive is that the wrestlers don't all look like they're wearing the same attire, which was prevalent in Warzone on the Game Boy. But full stop, that's where the positives end. Attitude on the Game Boy Color is a mess, and it mainly stems from the gameplay. Sure, similar to the shift from Warzone to Attitude, it's much of the same, but somehow this game is worse. The AI is just spammy as all get out. Game Boy wrestling games are limited at best, but there's been many over the years that have still been decent enough to play, and again, I reference Superstars on the Game Boy as the highlight of handheld wrestling. But Attitude is relentless. For example, do not let your opponent get your back in this game, because if you do, enjoy watching the game for a while. If you have your back to the opponent, it's very likely that they will spam you with a move known as an atomic drop, and just continue to hit you over and over and over again. Your only saving grace is if you're able to press the directional pad quick enough to turn your wrestler around to face your opponent. But even then, they're automatically hitting you with something else. It's just ridiculous. Also, what's with this Superman nonsense? If your opponent goes to the top rope, they will connect with the move every single time. It does not matter how far away from them you are. If you start moving, they just fly through the air like a homing missile, and they'll hit you no matter whether you're laying down, getting up, or standing up. It's so dumb. And tag matches? Once I was able to even get in the corner to try and tag my partner, the CPU just spammed me to the point where I was stuck. Oh, and this rolling bullshit again. The most sincere f***ness I've ever experienced in a wrestling video game. So that's that. No more talking about Attitude on the Game Boy Color. It's beyond awful. Before we wrap this up, here are some other factoids about Attitude that you may want to know about. You'll notice when you fire up Attitude on the PS1 and N64, there's a dedication honoring the late Owen Hart. He died during the company's pay-per-view event in May of 1999, and the WWF were quick to honor his memory and legacy following the tragedy. The game was originally supposed to be released in March of 1999, but was delayed until June and then further pushed to August due to the incident. However, you'll notice the dedication is missing from the Dreamcast release that came out later that year, and there's a reason for that. The World Wrestling Federation had a wrongful death suit against it from the Hart family, so they removed it. But they left Owen in the game. I'm not sure it makes sense, but there you go. Additionally, the Blue Blazers costume was removed from the Creator-Wrestler mode out of respect for Owen Hart, who died while wearing the costume. The Hardy Boys, Matt and Jeff, were in the WWF at the time, but they're not in the game. However, they did handle all of the motion capture for Attitude. Originally, the game was going to feature jobbers or enhancement talent as part of the career mode, but at some point in development, the team opted not to go that route. Their entrances, attires, theme song, and voice work, however, are all still in the game. Fun fact, the artist you hear singing those original entrance themes in-game, none other than the Road Dogg Jesse James.
It's the governor, baby, and I'm gonna rule all over you. Let's legislate. Yeah, I'm the governor.
Not all theme music and wrestler comments will be heard under the Everybody language option. If you set that option to teen or bleeped, you can hear different comments and intro theme music for Billy Gunn, Chyna, Triple H, Mark Henry, the Road Dogg, and X-Pac. Wrestlers have alternate attires and can be selected in the game simply by holding one of L1, L2, or R2 and pressing X on the PS1, or one of the C buttons on the N64. Depending on what publication you read, the game reviewed favorably for the most part. The Game Boy Color didn't review well, and now you know why. Game Informer gave the N64 release of Attitude a 9.5 out of 10, and the PS1 port a 9 out of 10, and most reviews were above that 8 out of 10 or better. The Dreamcast received a bevy of conflicting reviews, ranging from 8.5 out of 10 from IGN to a 40% from GameFan. All in all, Attitude wasn't seen as a poor game when you take a look at it from a broad perspective. WWF Attitude doesn't bring a lot different to the table from its predecessor, but what it does bring is a much more polished offering that takes everything Warzone does and polishes it up with a few tweaks to make it a better game. Some may say that's like polishing a turd, but I will say that Attitude does make enough improvements to provide a decent wrestling game, and it surely makes Warzone irrelevant to wrestling gamers. That is to say, there's no point to play Warzone if you're able to get your hands on Attitude. While Acclaim and the World Wrestling Federation had enjoyed a decade of partnership to produce wrestling video games, Attitude would prove to be the final WWF title published by Acclaim. The World Wrestling Federation had seen what else could be done in the video game wrestling genre, and they wanted something more. What they got, arguably, was the start of some of the greatest wrestling video games of all time.